Hello learners, I am Dr. Subodh Kesharwani, working with Indira Gandhi National Open University in School of Management Studies. The topic which I am going to talk today is research design. I think we have a very elaborative sessions on research. We have talked a lot on research methodology. We have talked a lot on various aspects of research. But the topic which we are choosing today is research design. And when you are talking about design, you are talking about how you are going to initiate a format. So what I mean to say that when you talk about this particular research, you have to see that what exactly the research methodology is, and this if you talk about the research methodology and statistical analysis, this is part of our MCOM program, and we have already touched on the first block, that is research and data collections. And if you talk about the preceding sessions, we have thrown a light on hypothesis, and prior to that we have talked about formulation of objectives, then research plan and research problem, then research methodology, research FAQs, research thought, and curtain result to research. So if you see this particular research, I think research is the backbone when you talk about the particular aspect, and as far as the research design is concerned, which we are going to discuss today in a more elaborative manner, it talks about how you are going to plan your research. And when you are talking about the research planning, which we have already talked about, this is a overall planning of the research and the design which we have. Anyway, I think this is a unit 2, this is a chapter 2 which we have covered, and the first, the chapter talks about the research problem and research plan, which we have already taken care in a more elaborative manner. Then we have formulation of objectives, and we see that how after going through the literature we come to the gaps, and from that gaps we formulate certain objectives. And when we formulate the objectives, then afterwards what happened, the hypothesis comes into picture. And in our preceding session, we have seen that how the alternate hypothesis, how the null hypotheses are there, and when to accept the hypothesis, when to reject the hypothesis. So this we have already covered in our preceding session. So today's session revolves around the research design. And what we have talked about, that when we talk about the research design is a very important thing, because it talks about from underneath to pinnacle, and how you're going to plan your journey while when you are in the process of doing the research. So we will cover the functions of research design, components of research design, and there are certain the studies and tests. So we are going to throw a light on that. That is a pre-test. So, and as far as the post-tests are concerned, like the testing of hypothesis, that we will exclusively deal when we will in the third blocks. So anyway, this is a genesis behind the research design. It starts with the topic, then questions, then variables, then data, then results, then discussion and conclusion. So if you see this particular thing, we see that the topic, we start with the topic, and then what happened, we have certain questions in our mind which we reframe it, and sometimes what we used to do, we float these questions to the respondents, and then the methodology comes into picture. There are certain methods which we have talked about, like survey methods, interview methods, or the case study methods, or the pedagogy which we are using. So afterwards what happens, then we are going to operationalize these variables, and we have independent variables, we have dependent variables. In this particular slide, in this particular presentation, we will also talk about how this dependent variables and independent variable works, and is there any correlation, is there any linkage between the two. And when we talk about all these variables, we will talk about definitely about that. Then the data comes. We have talked about data, and data is a something which is a very important ingredient when we talk about the research, because the data varies with the change of scenario, change of circumstances. So how we are going to collect the data when when there is the favorable circumstances, when there is an adverse situation. So collection of data, tabulating the data, then using the data as per your convenience, as per your need, that is also going to play a very important role, because when you talk about the data is in big shape, like your universal is there, then from there you do certain sampling, and when you talk about the sampling, you try to take into consideration certain models like random sampling or convenient sampling. So we will talk about all those terminologies, because that as far as the research methodology is concerned, as far as the statistical analysis is concerned, this this data and this sampling methodology, what we are talking about, is going to play a very important role, and it had a great impact also. So then you know how you're going to analyze the results, then interpreting the discussions, and finally concluding and summarizing. So this is the structure, this is the a procedures, a movement, starting from the choosing the topic and then end to the conclusion. And you see this particular image, and you come to know that that we have certain the layers, and when you are working systematically through these layers, I think the design of the research is going to be depicted by that. So research design is nothing but the procedures, the modus operandi you are going to follow, and how you are going to use this. That is more important. So there are certain questions which are coming while framing the research design, and it's not like that there is any thumb rule or rocket science behind that. Based on the circumstances, based on the individualistic approach, the research design need to be developed and created. Sometimes what we observe that for the particular jurisdictions, or when researchers is confined to the particular domain, then he or she has to follow a different modus operandi, and when he or she is having a different format, then he or she is going to do that model. So, and there are also certain good examples and there are certain bad examples. When we talk about the good examples always talks about that how you are going to reframe your research, and taking the circumstances into consideration, taking the situations into adaptability, and how you are going to adapt it. Because if you are not going to adapt the situations or the circumstances, you will not leads to a purpose for which you have started your research. So what I mean to say that as far as the research design is concerned, there are certain the bad examples. Like sometimes what we observe that when we study the literatures, when we go through the certain literatures and we start reviewing it, then what the problem comes, that we try to follow that same procedures, the same research which had been conducted in the Western world, and when we are doing the replica of it, when we are doing the replica of the research, then we try to adapt that modus operandi and that the tools research tool or statistical analysis, so that we can lead to the same conclusion. But it not happens, because if we do the consumer behavior research of the Western worlds vis-a-vis e-commerce or m-commerce, I think when you talk in the Indian scenario, or you talk about the metropolitan cities in India, I think the whole research has to be reframed again, and whole research has to be conducted in such a manner that it takes into consideration the indigenous flavor. On the other hand, what the researcher used to do, he or she tries to follow the same modus operandi what the Western world had done in their research. So I think that is where you have to lack, and this is where the research design is going to play a very important role. And if you talk about the research design, what is the study about? Like the first question which comes in the mind of the grassroots researchers, that what is this study about? And if this study is about certain things, then you have to start your journey from there. And why is the study being made? It's not like that somebody had done a research in the Western world, and and you are also going to do the similar kind of research in India. So when you are going to do the similar kind of research, I think certain gaps are there which exist there. But when you move into the Indian perspective, I think the gap need to be replaced or changed. So the moment you change the gap, I think the objective need to be reframed again, and then the hypothesis and everything could be jumbled. So what we observe, that one has to take care that why you are doing the research. You are doing the research because there is a need-based analysis, there is a need of it, or already someone had done that, and you just want to do the icing of the cake which already had been developed. It's not like that. When you are talking about the research, you have to do everything from underneath to pinnacle. You have to first develop the cake and then do the icing. It's not like that you can take the existing cake and just do the icing and finally do the window dressing and come up with the thing. So in that case, what will happen, the result will be quite biased in nature, and it is not going to fruitful to the society by and large. So these first two questions is very important, that why is the study being made, and if there is a need of the study, then you should do that. If there is no need of study, then you should take the topic which is quite burgeoning in nature. So what I mean to say that these are the parameters which need to be taken care, and there are certain questions which need to be answered in the very preliminary stage, in the very beginning stage. If you are going to get the answer, if you are going to provide the answer, or try to narrow down these certain questions and come to the conclusion, I think very easily you leads to a very good situation. So where will the study be carried out? And like jurisdiction is going to play a very important role, and if someone had done a research on a pan-India basis, and if you are going to take a similar kind of research, I think somewhere the overlapping is there. So then you should narrow down yourself that you are going to consider certain states of India. So where will be the study be carried out, and why this question had been asked? Because this question is talking about the universal, that which could be a universal and which could be your sample. So if you are universal is no doubt a bigger circle, and sample is from there revolves around that particular circle, and you are going to do the research. But on taking the sample, it could be random sampling, it could be convenient sampling, or the different kind of sampling. When we throw a light on this particular term called sampling, there we are going to cover certain terminologies which are linked with that. So what type of data is required? Whether it could be, sometimes what happen, we believe in, collecting the primary data or first-hand information, but secondary data there plays a very important role. If you talk about, the stocks, or doing the case study-based survey, or, the comparative analysis of 100 of companies vis-a-vis, the particular segment, I think there the things is going to play a very important role, that what type of data is required, and whether it could be a secondary data or primary data. And if your research is just studying what exactly the others have done it, I think the result could be quite different in nature, because you are going to have a comparative view of various the companies, and doing a elaborative analysis on the basis of that. So where can the required data be found? And now this is more important, because if you are not familiar with your respondents, if you are not knowing that how to float the questions, and to whom to float, giving the answer, it's their cup of tea, it's their discretion. But as a researcher, you should know that where you are going to float your questionnaires, and who could be your respondents. Maybe sometimes what happens, these respondents are hidden in nature, but on the other hand, you have to see that how these respondents are going to reciprocate. And because there's a very famous quotation which says that there are eggs and there are China eggs. If you talk about China eggs, the China eggs is the proverb which says that they never reciprocates. If you send them a questionnaires, if you provide them a virtual copy or a physical copy, they will take the questionnaire, but they will never reciprocates. So in that case, what happens, your research becomes stagnant at certain time. So you have to see how you're going to collect the data, and how you're going to float the questionnaires to them so that they can reciprocate. So what periods of time will the study include? That is a very important ingredient, because what we observe that if you do the research, I think there must be certain time frame. Either it could be a dissertation, or the project, small projects, or doctoral thesis. Because what we observe that if you are not adhere to the time, if you are not restrict yourself to the time, what will happen, that your study becomes redundant, or what will happen, the new things comes after certain time, after certain intervals. Say if you have made a timeline of 3 years, and you are not going to accomplish the task in this particular time frame, what will happen, that when the timeline pass, the new pedagogy will come, new approach will come, and in that case, what will happen, your objectives or your gap is going to be deviated. And if your gap is going to be deviated, then ultimately you have to introduce some new objectives. And if you are not in a position to introduce new objectives, ultimately what will happen, the research becomes redundant. And if you introduce the new objectives, ultimately what will happen, that this is going to create certain issues. Your question is going to be reframed again, and respondent's opinion will again differ from one another, and then you will be you require some more time to accomplish the task. So what will be the sample design, and how you are going to design the sample, and that is more important. And when we have an exclusive session on sampling, I think we are going to talk on in a very elaborative manner that what could be a sample, because choosing a sample is a very important aspect, because it's really cumbersome for the researchers to go through all the sides of the universal. So in that case, what the researcher used to do, he or she follows the procedure of sampling and try to collect the data from different ends, so that if we have taken the universal, say pan India could be the universal for any research. So what could be the model that all the jurisdictions of the India need to be covered. Like if you talk about pan India research, then certain states need to be taken care, and what are the parameters of choosing the particular states. It's not like that you can randomly choose this state or that state. There must be certain justification, and that justification need to be depicted while you are initiating a research. So what techniques of data collection will be used, and that we have already talked about, and how you're going to collect the data, because there are certain ways, and when you're going to collect the data, it should be in a different mode. So and how will the data be analyzed, because here the SPSS software, eViews, or the statistical software, which is going to play a very important role. In what style will the report be prepared, and finally when you are going to accumulate all the data, how you are going to present your report, because presentation is also a very important ingredient. If you are not able to present the things, like certain chapterization is there, like the first chapter talks about the preamble part or curtain raiser or introductory aspect, second would be the research methodology, third would be the data interpretation, and fourth will be how you're going to analyze the data, and finally you're going to conclude. So this could be the model which always apply, and these are the standard format which one has to follow. And when you're talking about the research design, I think one has to quite cautious while designing the research. So anyway, I think if you talk about the research design, in the words of Fred and Kerlinger, it is a plan, structure and strategy. So because research outline, plan and blueprint, it's also known as research outline, plan and blueprint, but on the other hand, it is basically a plan, structure and strategy. The plan includes everything the investigator will do, from writing the hypothesis and their operational implications to the final analysis of data, because what you observe that when we have found certain gaps, and on the basis of gaps certain objectives are there, we have already emphasized a very in a very elaborative manner that objectives could be in your fingertips, it could not be more than 5. There is no such thumb rule, but when you are having a 5 objectives, and if you are doing a research revolves around this particular 5 objectives or 3 objectives or 4 objectives, I think you can strengthen your research in a more systematic or strategical manner. So the structure is the outline, the scheme, the paradigms of the operations of the variables. And if you talk about the strategy includes the methods to be used to collect and analyze the data. Because if you are not having a strategy to collect the data, because we have already talked in our preceding sessions that right now the data is changing with the change of time, and it's quite juggling in nature. And there was a time when data was just merely 2-3 things, but right now the data is changing with the change of time, and the way technology is changing, we are moving. There's a great paradigm shift now. We are moving from text to this picture format, this graphical format, and then we have video format. So data is now no more a text data, but it could be a video data also, which could be a real-time data. It could be a data which could be movable in nature. So how you are going to acclimatize yourself when you are when you are dealing with the contemporary kind of data. So what I mean to say that if you talk about the research design, it's the decision regarding what, where, when, how, much, by what means concerning an inquiry or a research study constitute a research design. Because when you're talking about the research design, you have to see and you have to have certain questions in your mind, which already I have taken care that what, where, when, how, much. So the research design is a master plan specifying the methods and procedures for collecting and analyzing the need information. And no doubt it's very true that when you have developed the master plan it had certain time frame, and it had certain years, and during that years you can also twist yourself, you can twist the master plan, but it's not, but there could be a proportion of amendment up to some extent, like 10 to 20% amendment can be possible. But if you're talking changing the whole master plan from underneath to pinnacle, I think there are certain the misjudgment is there. So one has to quite cautious while doing all those things, and design includes an outline of what the researcher will do from writing the hypothesis and its operational implications to the final analysis of data. So what I mean to say that writing the hypothesis and operational implications to the final analysis of data is also very important, because there are certain time come when your objective is going to be changed. So if you go and talk about the ways to classify research design, you find out that the research design is an arrangement of conditions of collections. It could be descriptive, it could be correlational, it could be experimental, it could be review and meta-analytic. And if we are talking about the descriptive, we are talking about the case study, observation survey, which could be called as the research methods, which we have already covered. Then case study and observational study is also there. Then field experimental is there. Then literature review is there. Then so what we are talking about, the conversation which we have done till now, I think we have 7 to 8 conversations, starting from research, preamble part of research. Then we have talked about formulation of objectives, literature review. Then we have talked about the hypothesis. So all those research plan, research problem. So these are the important ingredient of the research design. And when you're designing anything, you have to take many things into consideration. So when this parts of research design talks about 4 important things, that is sampling design, observational design, statistical design, and operational design. So if you talk about the sampling design, it deals with the methods of selecting items to be observed for the study. And when you talk about the observational design, it relates to the condition under which the observation are to be created. Because what happens when the respondents reciprocates, and you have started accumulating the information which had been come from the respondents, which is the first hand information. So now you have to work on the certain observational design model where you are going to accumulate the data, and there are certain data which are overlapped. There are certain respondents which have answered the similar kind of answers, or the question which had been given to them, they have given the answers which are overlapped. So what you are going to do, you are going to accumulate, and you are going to narrow down these observations which are common in nature and which are different in nature. So there are certain observations which comes as a common phenomena, and some are quite different in nature, and some are deviate from others. So you have to have a model where you are going to consider all those things into consideration. Then statistical design, which concerns the questions of how the information data gathered are to be analyzed, and finally which deals with techniques by which the procedure satisfied in sampling. So there are certain procedures which need to be satisfied, because it's not like, because when you're talking about universal is a big circle, and it's have a pan in presence. And when you're talking about sampling is just a small part of the universal, and how you're going to satisfy with by the collection of the sampling, because there may be error also. So these errors are very different in nature. We have type 1 error, we have type 2 error. We will definitely talk about this particular terminologies also, because if you have taken a bigger circle, and from there you have just taken a small sample, what you are thinking that whether that sample is suffice, or it's enough to give the answer to that. So anyway, confirmatory research, if we are talking about this, confirmatory data analysis involves things like testing hypothesis, producing estimates with a specified level of precision, regression analysis and variance analysis. And confirmatory data analysis is where you are going to put your findings and arguments for trial. So then there are exploratory research. So confirmatory research is there, then exploratory research is there. There are certain difference between the two. One is an cause, other is an effect. So one is an opinion, other could be a result to that. So we will definitely differentiate how this confirmatory and exploratory research matters. And if you go more into the backdrop of exploratory research, you will find out it's a survey polls, it's a talk about the interview, focus groups, observations, then online research, then literature research and case study research. These are the exploratory research because you are in the process of exploring the informations, and some informations are collected in a primary mode, some in a secondary mode. So if you see this particular image, you will find out that opposite of confirmatory is exploratory, which could be negative, unrelated, independent, dissimilar, primary, principal, different and important. So if you talk about confirmatory versus exploratory research learn more about something specific, no assumptions, objective answering why questions, confirmatory validating a specific assumption, testing an assumption, hypothesis through research. So confirmatory is it true what we believe based on the existing theory and literature. We have already throw a light on what exactly the theory is and how the theory differs from hypothesis in our preceding sessions. And there, when you talk about a theory, you are talking about the facts, and theory defends with the certain facts and figures, whereas hypothesis could be assumption, which we have already taken care in our preceding session, and assumption may be true, assumption may be false, assumption can be accepted, assumption can be rejected. So and so that is the reason when we talk about hypothesis, we start with the null hypothesis and then we go for alternate hypothesis. Why we are talking about alternate? Because whatever the null hypothesis we have chosen, whether it could be accepted or sometimes it could be rejected. If it could be rejected, so we have option of alternative hypothesis also. So explanatory, what is going on and how we can explain it. So there are certain more differentiation between exploratory and confirmatory. If you see, left hand side talks about the focus, key features, and then different models. So discover and test. Exploratory talks about discovering, whereas confirmatory talks about the test, connecting ideas to understand cause effects, confirming a pre-specified relationship. If you see potential relationship, statistical significant results, developing a hypothesis and testing a hypothesis. So, and finally, maximizing the confidence in conclusion. And how the confidence will come? The confidence will come when you get the concrete results in your hand. So, with the help of exploratory study, we explore the things, and then confirmatory with the help of test, try to narrow down it and come to the conclusion. So, data consolidation from multiple sources, efficient exploratory algorithms are going to be used, and interactive data visualization is there. So highest accuracy if you talk about the confirmatory, variety of statistical calculations, and there are certain hypothesis testing methods. So when we are into our third, having 20-30 rounds of discussion, then when we start testing the hypothesis, I think this is where the role of confirmatory is going to play a very important. So exploratory is type 2 error, whereas confirmatory is type 1 error. So there are certain more difference if you talk about this when you are going to conduct the confirmatory study, it summarize and interpret the results. Now what I was talking about, this independent variable. So there was a term called variable. So this cause and effect relationship is going to be there, and when you are going to talk about the cause is manipulated, effect is measured, independent variables, and you have dependent variables. So independent variable changes in the independent variable can give the dependent variables, and like amount of water, changes in the amount of water and plant growth rate. So this, when you're talking about this model, so one is exposure variable if you talk about independent, other is outcome variable. One is control variable, other is controlled variable. Explanatory variable and dependent variable talk about explained variable. So if you talk about independent variable, it's more manipulated, and when you talk about dependent, it's more response variable. The very good example is it's mentioned here that 2 plus 2 equals to 4, which is considered to be where the first two, the prefix of the 2 is constant, and the dependent variable is 4 and independent variable is 2. If there could be any change in the second 2, like if we make it 3, so 2 plus 3 equals to 5. So change in the independent variable can result in the dependent variable. So what we observe that there are certain constant which always stay the same, and like there are certain data, so the secondary data is there, and when you are going to make certain changes with the help of this primary data, I think these are considered to be the independent variables. And then when you put the independent variables, and if you are going to make any change in that independent variable, automatically it will affect, like 2 plus 7 equals to 9. So the change in the second variable, like if we are making 2 with replacing 2 with 7, I think then 2 plus 7 equals to 9. So now the dependent variable also change, and that is there. So this is the way of changing in the dependent variable. And when we go and talk about more about this particular thing, we definitely see how things are going to be changed. Now, as far as this particular chapter is concerned, we are going to wind up this particular chapter now, and and if you see the contents available on our online portal or in a text format, you will find out the pilot study is also there at the end of this chapter. So small trial versions of proposed study, if you talk about any part of the study could be tested, the validity of measures, example given, questionnaire measures, what is supposed to, this is part of the, because when we talk about the pilot study works as a pilot project, and maybe that pilot study can be carried forward, and maybe it can stop at that juncture. So but it all depends like how you are going to do that. So effectiveness of procedure, example given, does it take too long, are the instruction too complicated, have any steps been left out? And the pilot study is an important part of the experimental process, because you are in a position to carry this pilot study, or you can shut down that study at that time. So there is not, if you talk about the net loss or the net profit, it's not going to affect more, because if the study which you have taken is not going to carry forward, I think you can stop that at that juncture, and ultimately what will happen, you can start with the new study. So the pilot study work as a small project, as a need-based analysis, and if you are confident with that need-based analysis or with the study, you can just excel that. Otherwise, you can stop that at that point. So this is a model, and there are certain steps in the pilot study. It starts with the problem formulation, then hypothesis settings. We have already thrown a very elaborately about the hypothesis, and we have seen that how the hypothesis is going to be created, and how the gaps are going to be explored, and then objectives are there, and then from that objectives the model is going to come up, and how you're going to set the objectives. So based on the certain objectives, you have as much as hypothesis and as much as alternative hypothesis also. So define objectives, determining scope, research design. Research design, we are here. We see that how we have designed the research, and if you see this particular hierarchy, that how we are moving, we start with the problem formulation, we start with exploring the literature, then setting the hypothesis, then defining object, like we are setting our target, and then research design, then pilot testing. Pilot testing is what we have talked about, the pilot study kind of thing which we are talking about, then data analysis, testing of hypothesis, and then findings, and then prescription. So we will apply certain tests as far as the hypothesis is concerned, and we see how the results are going to come up. So then prior to doing all those things, there are certain pre-testings which are going to play a very important role, and pre-testing is an important way to pinpoint problem areas, reduce measurement, reduce respondent burden, determine whether or not respondents are interpreting questions, because it's a big challenge, when you start your journey by massively going through the literature, then come to the objectives, then come to the gap, and then narrow down to objectives, then framing hypotheses, and then on the basis of hypothesis frame certain questions. And when these questions float gone to the respondents, sometimes respondents comes up with a very different experience, and when you are reading those experiences, those respondents' opinion, you realize that you are in the no man's land, because maybe there are certain things which need to be incorporated. So what happened, you have to start your journey again, you have to recapitulate yourself, and again you have to do the things from scratch. So when you talk about the pre-testing is something like you are just doing a small test and trying to find out that whether this model or this modus operandi which you are choosing is have a long-term impact, or the certain changes is going to come. So that is very true. It's not like that in research it is there. If you talk about the automobile industry, I think when automobile giants come up with any product, or the innovative product, they do lot of the pre-test, or they do pilot studies, and they do lot of pre-test. The intention is very clear. They want to know what exactly the shelf life of the product is, and maybe if the product can come into the market, uh, what different kind of errors could be there, and if that errors can be diagnosed in the very beginning stage, they try to shut down it at that juncture only. So this is the genesis behind the pre-testing, because pre-testing is a very important, having a very great impact, because when the product goes to consumers, and if the consumers give the opinion, like the post uses of the product, and if the negative comment comes, if the adverse comments comes, in that case what will happen, the brand images sometimes sabotages. So if you are going to rectify or come out from all those things, you have to have a pre-testing model. So this pre-testing is a very important ingredient, and this can provide us certain ways by which we can rectify. So it's purely talking about how we can rectify ourselves too, and finally to evaluate the reliability and validity of the survey instruments prior to the final distribution, because rather if we try to resolve the issues at our end in the beginning stage, and when come up when the product is at the final stage and floated to the consumers, or the research will go to the respondents, and it could be foolproof, definitely it have a great impact. So I think we have talked a lot about research and other things, and research design is a very important ingredient. It's not just merely a design of anything, or having a physical presence or the virtual presence or the front face. It's a back face also. It's just a combination of the back end and the front end. So it's not like that when you talk about the design, you have to talk about the presentation, and in the backdrop you find out you are no more systematic in that particular aspect. So when you're talking about design, you have to integrate yourself in such a manner that there must be a linkage between the back office and the front office. So this research design is no more talking about the one of the ingredients, but it gives the holistic integration of the research. I think we have talked a lot about this thing, and in our next session, which could be a next chapter now, we will start with that, and whatever the terminologies which are coming in due course as far as the research is concerned, we will definitely have an elaborative view on that. Thank you very much. Thank you.